So I'd like to wish everyone good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whichever it is for you. I hope you can hear me. Let me know if you can hear me before I go on too long. You can hear me today. Okay. So we will begin today by, as usual, reciting the prayers for going for refuge and rousing bodhicitta. So please think to yourself that we are doing this class for our own and for others' benefit in order to achieve Buddhahood and bring all other sentient beings to Buddhahood as you recite these prayers. O sangye chedan tsogi chonam la chancho parado dane chapsum che dagi chunyen yi pe sunam yi drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan Tsoge chonam la chancho barado da ne chapsum je dagi chunyen gi besunam ji Drola penjir sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dagi chunyen gi besunam ji Drola penjir sanje drobar sho. And now once in English. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamje dewa dan dewi judan dembrar jurji donga dan donga ji judan rawa jurji donga mebe dewa tamba tam min rawa jurji nyerin shadan nitan rawa tanyon chambola nebra jurji. So now please think to yourselves that, first I have to reset the prayers. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishtas, the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now think to yourselves that we need to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we need to listen to and contemplate and meditate upon the Dharma. Of these, generally the first step is the step of listening. And so think to yourselves today that we are engaging in listening in order for this reason. I'm going to adjust my camera. Now, the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the 9th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. So there are 8 chapters in this, and of the 8 chapters, we are discussing the 5th, the chapter on the kernels. So here at this point, well, I might as well go through all the topics where we are. The teachings on the kernels has three parts: the nature of the kernels, what discards the kernels, and the results of discarding the kernels. And the nature of the kernels has the two sections: the presentation of the teaching that the kernels are the root of existence, and then the section on understanding the kernels. So we've talked about the first. It's very brief, it's just one line. And now we're talking about the second, understanding the kernels, which has three topics: the classifications of the kernels, how the kernels arise, and the enumerations of the kernels. So of these two, we are still talking about the first, the classifications of the kernels. So classifications of the kernels, the reason why we classify them, or we look at the different types of them, is because when you understand the different types of kernels, or the seeds of the afflictions, then you have a better idea of how they work and what they do. So that's the reason for looking at the classifications, and they're the general classifications into 6, 7, 10, or 98 that we discussed earlier. And then there are also the specific classifications. And so we are, so there's the classifications of essence, which we have already spoken about, the classification of the aspects, and the classification of what has the kernels. And so the classifications of the essence are the classifications into 6, 7, 10, and 98, as well as the classifications of the prides and views. And then the classifications according to their aspects talk about all the kind of interesting things about how the kernels work. Which kernels do what? That's basically what we're saying. And so there are 5 different topics. So the first is a classification of universal or not. So universal, as I described the other day, means like, actually maybe omnidirectional is a slightly better word in English, although not the most beautiful of words. But I'm not sure that Abhidharma is a place for beautiful words. Maybe it is, it should be. Then we have the distinctions of focusing on the undefiled, so whether they can focus or observe the undefiled phenomena, whether they're developed by concurrence or focus, and then the classification of as they're non-virtuous and neutral, and which kernels tie one down into 3 times. And so that's the part that we are speaking about at this point. Which kernels tie you down into 3 times. And in terms of the talking about which kernels tie you down into 3 times, they're how the specific afflictions bind, or excuse me, there's 4 parts to that. There's the things to which you are tied. In other words, what binds you? What do you think about? So yesterday I used, for example, the example of past desire, thinking about the chocolate oblivion truffle torte that was an object of desire 25 years ago, right? Or might still be an object of desire, I don't know. Then examining the 3 times, and that's the section that we're speaking about now, discarded yet possessed, and which dharmas are the objects of which cognitions. So of these 2, we finished the first, the things to which we're tied, and now we're talking about the examination of the 3 times. And so I think at this point, it's good to take a step back, and we had 2 questions from our YouTube audience that came in last night, or yesterday. They might have come in during the class yesterday, but I didn't see them during the class. At any case, the 2 questions that came in, the first of them was when we talk about the Abhidharma. We talk about Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidharma, and then I've also been talking about the auto commentary on the Treasury of Abhidharma. So what is that? So this is actually an interesting question. I mean, there's a simple answer and a long answer, but I think giving the long answer is going to maybe give you more of a context, because I think part of the difficulty when we're starting, and I'm realizing this thinking about the questions, part of the difficulty in doing a class like this is that there was a first class that only a few people were there. It wasn't broadcast widely. Then there was a second class that many of you may have listened to at YouTube, either when I taught it last year or at some point over the ensuing months. But it's still probably might not be all that fresh for you. And then there's this class. And for me, it's all like, okay, I taught that already. I don't need to go over it again. But actually, there's a lot that you may not have already been through. And so it's important to think about where are we at? So when you think about what is the auto commentary on the Treasury of Abhidharma, well, the simple answer is that Vasubandhu wrote the Treasury of Abhidharma first, the verses, and then he wrote then he taught it to his students, and they said, "This is fabulous. This is great." But just the verses on their own, we're not going to remember all the details. So could you also write an auto commentary? So he wrote a second text called the auto commentary on the, well, in English we call it the auto commentary. That's kind of taking the translating the Tibetan word. And auto here means that it's by the author himself. So auto here meaning self, not automatically. It's not like a computer generated, automatically generated, which, these days, that's how we kind of use the word auto commentary. Go to the website, insert your root text and press a button and it generates a commentary for you. That would be one of those academic fraud websites. So that's not what we're talking about here. Instead, it's that Vasubandhu then wrote down what he taught to his students about all the points that are contained in the root verses. So there are two things here. The first thing is kind of the relation between the root verses and the auto commentary. And when we look at this as people coming from a 21st century point of view, it's natural to think, well, the auto commentary is more important because it gives the full explanations of everything. The verses, yeah, they're kind of there, but they're not so important because if you really want to know the specifics of Vasubandhu's thought or Vasubandhu's presentation of the Abhidharma, actually is what we should say, of the specifics of his presentation of the Abhidharma, then you need to look at the auto commentary. So there's a lot of thinking, especially among academics, that the auto commentary is what is most important. But when we look at how the text was originally taught, actually, the auto commentary is like a supplement to the root verses. And the reason, I think one reason for this is just a simple this is a bit of speculation on my part, I'm going to admit that. But when you have a situation where where books are not plentiful, there was no printing, and you had to copy texts either on palm leaves that you prepared yourselves. So I think palm leaves are probably pretty cheap themselves in India, but preparing them and then writing a text on them is a lot of work. Or in Tibet, where you're writing it on paper, well, buying paper is very expensive, or was very expensive, and copying it out by hand is very laborious. So in that sort of a situation, what's important are the root verses. Because you memorize the root verses, and once you have them memorized, you don't need to look at them. You don't need more books or tapes or anything. You just look at the root verses, and that is, you just remember the root verses. So there's no need for anything else. And then when you remember the root verses, they're kind of cryptic. Even in Tibetan and Sanskrit, they don't give a lot of detail, but they give you enough that you can remember, oh, that's what this point is. And if you really studied and contemplated them, then they bring you a lot more. So then they're really actually very interesting. I kind of think of them as like a key that unlocks the whole thing. So all you need is that little key of the root verses, but they are not detailed on their own, and there are a lot of antecedents that are unclear. If you don't remember what there are, you're kind of lost. And so that's why things like the auto commentary are helpful. And then later, of course, we had other commentaries by people like the ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. Now, so that's the first point. Then the second point is, how did we get to the point of needing the Abhidharma and the auto commentary? Well, the teachings that the Buddha gave, when the Buddha taught, he would go to a place, go to a sponsor's house, receive a meal, and teach. And what he taught were the sutras. Or they would be sitting at some monastery, which would kind of be like a bunch of huts made out of wattle and daub. We don't use this word much anymore because we don't make huts out of wattle and daub much anymore, but basically sticks with mud plastered on them and thatched roofs, or whatever sorts of roofs, the very basic sorts of huts. Maybe a few brick buildings here or there, but not so many, because it was, 600 BC, 500 BC, somewhere in there, the 6th century BC. So at that time, the Buddha would also give teachings to the Buddhas, to the bhikshus, and also later some to the bhikchunis as well. And so in these teachings, he'd teach about different topics each day, but he wasn't thinking, I'm going to go through in a systematic order. It's like, what needs to be taught today? What needs to be taught to this being today? And so in some he's very, what do we say? In some he's very, very brief. In some he's very expansive and goes into detail. But they're all kind of scattered in different sutras. And so what happened later is there first developed a way of people making kind of mental charts, what they called literally matrices, or mamo in Tibetan, matrika in Sanskrit. So they'd make these kind of mental things to systematize them, to remember like the five, a simple one would be say, remembering the list of what are the 5 aggregates, what are the 18 elements and so forth, and then even more complicated ones as you go through further. And then these were later collected and put together and arranged in order, and these became the basic teachings of the Abhidharma that were written down later by arhats. There are 7 basic treatises of the Abhidharma in the Vaibhashika tradition. So, the Buddhism spread all over India. Some teachings went south into Sri Lanka. Those became the Theravada school of this day, and they preserved their own treatises on Abhidharma, which have many similarities but some differences. And then there are the teachings of what became the Sarvastivada school. So this school developed probably around the time of Ashoka. I'm not exactly certain. It's hard to date these things anyways. But it developed around them, and it spread especially in the western regions of India, and most particularly later in Kashmir. And so the Sarvastivada tradition, why are they called Sarvastivada? The reason for this is what we discussed yesterday. The Sarvastivada masters were thinking about, well, how do all phenomena work? How can you have cause and result? Because if the past doesn't exist, then how can it produce a result? That's one important question, causation. I mean, if you look at, for example, Nagarjuna's root stanzas on the middle way, that's a big issue, is how does causation work if the past doesn't exist and the future doesn't yet exist? And how can it work? So the Sarvastivada, one aspect of saying that is, well, past phenomena exist substantially so that they can actually hold and be able to produce a result. And also future phenomena exist substantially. So they're saying that there's substantial existence of phenomena in all 3 times. So they're called those who say sarva, all, asti, exist, vada. So those who say everything exists, basically. So that's how they got the name. And that's the primary name of the school. But later in Kashmir, there are a lot of masters there. And they compiled a great treatise called the Great Exposition of the Abhidharma, or the Great Exposition. And this is what they call the Mahavibhasha. So in Sanskrit, that branch of this, they started to call the school, instead of Sarvastivada, they started calling it Vaibhashika. And so that's what we call is often called in English, the Exposition or Great Exposition School. But that treatise is huge. There is it's preserved in Chinese. It's not in Tibetan. It was not in Tibetan, and the Sanskrit is no longer extant. The Chinese version was translated into Tibetan by a Chinese monk who went to Tibet in the 30s and 40s and spent many years at the Ganden Monastery, and translated it into Tibetan. And that there's a facsimile of his handwritten edition that is available, and I've seen it. That facsimile is a big stack of books. So it's huge. How can you remember all that? I mean, it's huge and it's very clear. So Vasubandhu then took that and kind of brought it and condensed the main points and the meaning into this treasury of Abhidharma that is easier to understand. It's shorter. I mean, the root verses, it's under 1,000 root verses, so that's very easy to memorize. It's comparatively easy to memorize. Back in the day, people had no problems memorizing these things. We, as Westerners who grow up not memorizing things, especially if you grew up after they stopped making you memorize things in school, so that's, I think, most of us, I think people who had gone to school maybe 10 years before I did memorized a lot more than I did. And people who had gone to school 20 years before had memorized an awful lot more. But from the time I went to school, basically in English class, you never memorized any poems. You never did much memorizing. In French class, they made us memorize one poem. That's all I had to memorize in high school is one poem. So our memory muscles don't work. But if your memory muscles are exercised, then 1,000 stanzas is not unreasonable. There are people these days. We had a conference with monks from the Tibetan, Burmese, Thai traditions, and Chinese traditions in Varanasi, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I don't remember. And the Burmese monks were talking about people who would memorize the entire Vinaya, which is like, in the Burmese tradition, it's 5 volumes. It's a good thing they aren't in the Tibetan tradition. They would have had to memorize 13 volumes. Or is it 11? No, 13 volumes of the Vinaya. But in the Burmese tradition, all they had to memorize was 5 volumes. But people do this. It's not as unreasonable. Actually, if you think about it, memorizing is not so hard. If you ask any teenager to recite recite the words of their favorite songs, they can probably recite the words of dozens, if not hundreds of songs. So memorizing is not that difficult. We just don't use it. And so it's hard for us. But originally, people would take Vasubandhu's root text, they would memorize it. They could also copy it more easily because it's shorter. And then there would be, the text that the master would be teaching them from that would give you the explanation, whether the auto commentary or later in Tibet, the Chim commentary, or a commentary such as this one by Wangchuk Dorje, that's a bit shorter. And so the teacher would teach that. And the students, what they do is they'd have like 1 or 2 copies for the class. And they'd pass the pages back and forth and say, hey, when you're done with that page, can I have it? And so, because, if you wanted the book, you had to copy it out. There weren't Xerox machines back then. So this is how, and this is why in the oral tradition, the verses on the treasury of Abhidharma are really the most important. So the whole point here is to kind of give you an idea of the historical background of how the work fits, because how the work came about, how it came down. It was passed down by this way of people memorizing the root and getting teachings on it, sharing copies of the commentaries and then passing them on to friends and so forth. This happened for hundreds of years in India and then for over 1,000 years in Tibet. There were many different commentaries, and Wangchuk Dorje's commentary is kind of a shorter one. It's easier for beginners, and so we're going on this using this commentary now. And then, now in the present day, books are plentiful, printing is plentiful, and now you don't even need a book. All you need is a computer and the text, and you can study. So it's like the technology is getting easier and easier. The difference is that as the technology gets easier and easier, in a sense, we get lazier and lazier, and we spend less time actually storing it in ourselves. So it's important for us when we're studying to think, well, how can I actually do this? Because it's like when we have teachings from great masters, such as the Gyalwang Karmapa, he's always talking about how you need to incorporate it into your being. You have to take the teachings and you have to see, what does it mean for you? How does it affect you? And so actually, even when we're doing a teaching like the Abhidharma, that on one level is pretty dry and philosophical, especially the way it's sometimes presented, you still have to look and see, how does this apply to me? What do I see in myself? I think that actually the point we've been speaking about now, how the afflictions bind you to objects, is actually a really good way for us to see, how does this work, right? We can look and see. I mean, I might be using a stupid, I might be using a stupid example about some cake. It's a completely insignificant thing. But because we get attached to food, you can remember that. Or you might have visited some country where they served you soup with eyeballs floating in it. You may live in a country where they serve you soup with eyeballs floating in it. I don't know. And you have a reaction to that, and you remember what it's like when you saw that eyeball staring up at you out of that soup. How did you feel? Like delicious or revulsion, right? Whichever you felt, that's an affliction, right? If you say delicious, that is attachment. That's part of the attachments that's binding us to samsara. If you say, "Ugh," that's aversion. Right? And so that's kind of also binding us. Actually, it's just an eyeball. You've got two right here. If you're saying ooh about the one in the soup, what do you think about the ones in your face? Well, you don't see your own. When you see someone and you see, oh, such beautiful eyes, that eye is not any different than, than the one that's floating in the soup, right? It's exactly the same. It's just an eyeball. It's just a lump of flesh that has certain characteristics so that you could see, you know? Maybe it tastes good. I don't know. Some people think it does, right? So that's the, that's, you know, what we think about. That's part of it, is thinking, how does it work in ourselves? How do the afflictions work? What do they do? We have these, and we're talking here about the kernels, so we're talking about not about the manifest afflictions. We'll get to those in a couple of days. We're talking about what are those little seeds inside of ourselves. So why is it important to talk about what these little seeds are? Well, one thing is that when you are sitting doing your meditation, you're meditating on shamatha and then on insight meditation to see the nature of the truth. At that point that you're doing meditation, if you have manifest afflictions, you are distracted and you're not actually doing meditation, for one thing. If you are not distracted and you're looking, then you're not actually seeing manifest afflictions. You're seeing actually the seeds. You're able to see that you're able to do what we're working with. What we need to eliminate are the seeds. Because if you can uproot the seeds, then nothing's going to grow, right? So that's the point. That's the work that we're going to do. So this leads us into the second question. The second question was, I've been using the word discards a lot. And so the discard, it's a noun in English. Then there's the word, there's the noun discard, and then there's the verb to discard. Same spelling, slightly different stress. This is just one of those strange things about English. So when you talk about a discard, the noun, what that means is something you throw away, something you want to get rid of, something you're trying to eliminate. So when we're talking about the afflictions, we're trying to, the goal of our practice is to eliminate our afflictions, especially in the Great Exposition School. Now, some of you might have heard teachings on Mahamudra Dzogchen where they talk about there's no need to eliminate the afflictions. And this is a different method of dealing with them. In the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition, the way to eliminate the afflictions is actually to just see their nature. And if you see their nature is wisdom, and so forth. And so that's another way of doing it. The end effect is the same, because when you see the nature of an affliction, the affliction cannot manifest as an affliction. It manifests as wisdom instead. But here, we're not talking about that level of practice. We're talking about the level of the Great Exposition. So this is a tradition where the goal is to uproot and eliminate the afflictions in order to not allow them to what do we say, so that they do not disturb you anymore. Because if you've got the kernels, and then when the kernels develop, they develop into afflictions. And what afflictions do? The characteristic of an affliction is that it disturbs your mind. So we want to change, so we don't want them to disturb our mind, because when your mind is disturbed, then you can't see clearly. So you want to see clearly. And then when you see clearly, the afflictions are disturbing things, but actually the nature is the nature of the Four Noble Truths, the nature of, suffering, origin, cessation, and path. And when you see the nature of the Four Noble Truths, and you truly see it, and you truly know it, then at that point, there's wisdom. And that wisdom is kind of exclusive of the afflictions. It's like the wisdom is fire and the afflictions are ice cubes. What happens when you put an ice cube on a fire? It melts, and then it goes away. It just turns, there's none left. So it's like when you turn on a light. First, the room is dark. You turn on the light, you press the light switch, you can see there's no more dark, right? So that's what we're talking about. You see the nature, and that eliminates afflictions. In particular, that eliminates those that are that are discarded by seeing the truth. So these are what we call the discards of seeing. So discards here means what you're eliminating. So we want to try to eliminate all the desire, anger, delusion, pride, doubt, and view in our beings. And so the way to do that is to first see the nature of the truth. When you see the nature of the truth, you see it actually in order. That order we'll talk about more in the 6th chapter, but generally you see the truth of suffering first, then the truth of origin, then the truth of cessation, then the truth of seeing. And as you see each of those, then different levels of misconceptions just go away. Because all of the afflictions are based upon the ignorance of not recognizing yourself, not recognizing your nature. And when you recognize that you're empty, selfless, empty, impermanent, selfless, and suffering, the 4 characteristics of the noble of truth, and you see that the 5 aggregates are that, then that all goes through. Then when you see the nature of the truths of origin and cessation and path and order, then you know, everything that is based on the misconceptions that you're clearing away goes away. So those are what we call the discards of seeing, okay? And there are the 4 classes of discards of seeing. That means 4 different types of afflictions. Those discarded by seeing the suffering, those discarded by seeing the origin, those discarded by seeing cessation, and those discarded by seeing the path, those 4 classes, right? So those are 4 of our classes. But when we do that, these discards of seeing are actually kind of the easiest ones to eliminate. They're kind of based on ideas. In fact, in some sources, they talk about how they're entirely mental. They're all the 4 aggregates of the formations, feelings, conceptions, formations, and consciousness. It says this in the Abhidharma. And so there's these 4 aggregates. So it's basically mental. Because they're mental, they're easier to get rid of because there's no real basis for them. It's all mind. So the discards of seeing are generally based on the illusion, particularly on the illusion of there being a self, a me, and there being mine. That's the main one. But when you get through to all those delusions, there's still, there's still the things that we see with our eyes and the things we hear with our ears, the forms, right? And the forms, you've got form and sound, the visual form, sound, scent, taste, and touch. You've got these sensory objects. And you can still, you have eliminated all the discards of seeing, but you're still attached. You still get hungry and are distracted by your hunger. It still disturbs you. You still think, I've got to eat. So you feel, you have a sensation of hunger, and then you feel desire for food. Desire for food, right? So that desire is also attachment. So that also prevents us from liberating ourselves entirely. So we need to get rid of that too. But that's harder to get rid of. And so as a result, that it isn't necessarily just seeing. You also have to go through the whole path of meditation to eliminate your desires or your attachments and all the other meditation discards, that is, all those things that are discarded by meditation, in not just the desire realm that we're in, but also in the subtler levels of existence, the form realm and the formless realm. And so that's why the path of meditation, the discards of meditation, they're not broken down quite the same way as the discards of seeing into 4 classes. They're all kind of lumped together. And when you look at it in this, it says in 98, well, you've got 4, basically. You've got, or 5, you've got the, what is it? You've got desire, anger, pride, desire, anger, delusion, pride, and doubt in the desire realm, and then all except for anger in the 2 higher realms, right? So those are, am I missing one? No, I'm not. I think that's right. No, there's no doubt. So it's only 4, right? Doubt, once you've seen the truth, there's no more doubt. But the desire, anger, delusion, and pride are there. So it looks like there are fewer meditation discards when you kind of look at it in this way, but actually there's a whole lot of meditation discards. So they have to go over stages. So we'll touch on that later today, unless I've already spoken for too long and we don't have time to get as far as I initially intended. But I think that's the important point. The important point, when we're talking about discards, we're talking about the things we want to eliminate in our being. And in particular, in the Great Exposition School, this means the afflictions, okay? So those are the discards, and that's some historical background. And the reason I thought about doing this a little bit in more depth than just giving a brief answer, I could have answered each of these questions in 2 minutes each. But the reason I thought it was important to do this is because, as I said earlier, this is the third year of a class, but not everyone has watched every session of every time. And many of you just have no way to have seen the first year because you just physically weren't there. So I think it's important to go through that. So where we came to yesterday, we were talking about the Sarvastivada view that things in all three times exist. So when we talk about times, to just review, we're talking about time. In general, the time means the aggregates, the 5 aggregates. There's no separate sort of time. As I said yesterday, it's not a Newtonian conception of time where there's some absolute time where you measure everything against it. This is more just saying that things that have arisen and perished are past. Things that have arisen but are not yet perished are present. Things that have not yet arisen are future. So in the Sarvastivada view, they say that the phenomena of the 3 times have to exist. And they give 2 reasons for this. The first is that you can actually apprehend the objects of the past and future. There is, as I mentioned yesterday, there's clairvoyance, such as the Buddha's clairvoyance. But actually there's also, even for regular, ordinary individuals, we can use our intellectual mind to understand them. For example, when you see a result, you understand that there was the cause before it. So when you see when you see a fruit, you understand that the seed of that fruit tree must have come before. You see the fruit, you understand that there must have been a flower earlier, right? You can know this. So in that way, you're apprehending the past time. With the future, it's a little bit more difficult. You can't necessarily say that just because there's a cause doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a particular result in the future, because there's so many conditions that have to come together for the causes and results to work out that way. So the future is a little bit more difficult. But in general, we know that there are things that are going to happen in the future. For example, as it's taught in karmic cause and effect, if you act out of, if you perform an action motivated by an affliction, then it's going to result in future existence, right? So that's and that's a general teaching of Buddhism, so you can understand. You did something bad. You murdered your neighbor last night. So what's going to happen from that? In the future, you're going to experience the rebirth, and the fully erupting result of that is experiencing a future rebirth in the lower realms and so forth. So that is, basically thinking about the future. Now, that's the first thing, is that you can think and you can understand and you can know the past and future with your mind. You can't know it with your eyes and ears. And the eyes and ears, the sensory consciousnesses only engage the present, but the mind can think about the past and future. So that's one reason why the past and future has to exist. It's because it can be you can apprehend it. Now, the second reason there has to be the past and future, they say, is that, well, if you're going to have cause and effect, and you say that the effect is something real, you got to have a real cause. And if you say that something is real when it's in the present and then it becomes nothing in the past, how can it act as a cause? And particularly when you have karmic cause and effect, you killed your neighbor last night. So that murder, that act of murder, is a past phenomena. If you say that past is just nothing, then it doesn't exist anymore. It's no different than turtle fur, essentially, because it just doesn't exist anymore. It's perished. It's gone. So how is it that that's going to produce the result of, being hacked and hewed in hells? How is that going to happen? So the Sarvastivada school is saying that, well, then the past has to exist and the future has to exist. And otherwise, you can't say that there's any relationship between cause and effect. There's no way to say it otherwise. You can also look at this from, you can see other reasoning based on this idea. If you look at the root stanzas of the Middle Way by Nagarjuna, it also talks a lot about the relationship between cause and result and how they are whether they exist or whether they don't exist, and so forth. And so analyzing that way. So Nagarjuna's response is basically none of it really exists, none of it substantially exists. But the Sarvastivada school is different in that they assert that things do have substantial existence. So they say that things that are in the past must exist substantially. Things that exist in the future also must exist substantially. And things in the present, of course, they exist substantially. We can experience them right now. The body, like my body right now, I can feel it. It must exist substantially. So because they say that things exist substantially, then they kind of get into this whole issue then of saying, well, how? How does it work? And so they come up with the different traditions here. And we spoke about these yesterday. It's on the bottom of page 405 of the book. The 4 traditions of transforming thing or transforming characteristics, transforming state, and relative dependence. Now, if you look at the translation of the Chim Abhidharma by Ian Coughlin, he uses these same words in a different order. So it's kind of hard sometimes. He calls that I call transforming thing. He calls transforming state. So, but the meaning is the same, whichever terminology. And this is just a problem in English translation in general, that we don't have a standard English Dharma terminology. That's a difficulty we have to just put up with at this point. So these 4, of these 4, you've got the first, the transforming state, is basically saying that you have something that is in the future, and then it transforms into a present thing, but its substance is still the same. And then it transforms into a past thing, but its substance is still the same. So the analogy is like, a gold jug that then you melt down and make a gold pot. So first, you have the gold jug and the gold pot. A jug and a pot are different. They do different things, but they're the same in that they can that they have the same substance, gold. They have the same color. They have the same qualities of gold, the same malleability, and whatever the other characteristics you say. So they say it's the same substance that just changes over time. That's the first. And the second of these is the transforming characteristics, which is saying that the phenomena of the 3 times actually, when they're in each of the times, they of course have the characteristic of their own time, but they also have the characteristics of the other 2 times. So they don't really change. It's just it's just that one is like more dominant, but they still have the characteristics. So that a past phenomena does not possess, as they put it, double negative here, it doesn't not possess the present and future characteristics. For example, the analogy they give is of here it says a man and a woman, but a person feeling lust for one person can feel lust for other people as well. At the time that you're feeling specific lust for one specific person, the lust for other people is not manifest. But you've still got the seed of it there. So tonight you are feeling like you're going to, tonight you go to one bar. You see one person and you feel lust for that one person. Tomorrow night you go to another bar and you see another person and you feel lust for that other person. And then the next night you go to another bar, because this is what we do this is what people do. A lot of people do these days. Just like, you can go, when you're at the second bar, you've forgotten about the first person, but you're not feel free of lust for them. Right, so that's kind of what they're saying. It's that the characteristics move through time. The third tradition is that of the Venerable Vasumitra, who says that basically things happen. That what differentiates the time is the state of action. So in the future, the action has not yet occurred. The action of arising hasn't yet occurred. In the present, the action is occurring. In the past, it has already occurred. It is done. So that is how you differentiate it. The substance of the thing is the same, but the action is different. That's what they say. And then the fourth is the tradition of relative dependence, which basically is saying that it just depends on how you look at it. If you have one phenomena in relation to another phenomena, it is past, and in relation to a third phenomena, it is future or something like that. So for example, if you have something that you did in, oh, I don't know. You've got New Year's Eve of 2020, 2000, no, you've got, that's New Year's, I don't have a present example. So you've got July, what is it? It's the 16th, isn't it? So you've got June 16th of 2020, June 16th of 2021, and June 16th of 2022. You've got these 3 times. June 16th of 2021 is today, it is present. In relation to last year when more people were locked down and no one had any vaccinations, it was in the future, and it was like a future we were all looking forward to, kind of. And 2022 is certainly a future that we go, oh yeah, we're all going to be vaccinated by then, right? So it's present in relation to last year, and it's future in relation to this year. 2022, June 16th of 2022, is the future in relation to June 16th of 2020 and 21, but it's the past in relation to 2023 or 4, whatever. I'm losing track of my years. At any rate, so that's how it works, you know. Like June 16th of 2020 is past in relation to this year. Last year it was present, and from 2019 it would have been future. You know, a future that we had no idea was going to happen, right? So it's like that. That's what they're saying. But they all have all of the times available, or all the times are existing at the same time. It's just a question of which is what. So among the 4, the point that we've come to now, we've got the Vasubandhu has laid out these 4 positions, and says that of these 4 positions, the one that's best is the third. And so where are we on that one? Now, let me get that open. Oops. Where did it go? Are you seeing the, oh yeah, I think you're seeing the right one, the text, right? The third is best because the times are there presented through their action. So it's like he's saying that this is the best position. So basically it's saying that anything that hasn't yet performed its action is in the future. It's performing its action is present. When it is done doing its action, then it is past. So that's kind of the best. So but at the end of this, he gives the little bit of, what he says, it's at the end of the paragraph, so it is heard. And this is another one of Vasubandhu's, and it repeats in all the commentaries of what they call the Marang Pitsik, the skeptical words. That's what they say. This is the best of the 4, but it still just doesn't make any sense. That's the problem. Okay, so this is what we talked about yesterday. Now here, at this point, the next stanza is talking about the criticism of this. And this is Vasubandhu's criticism, and it's also a criticism of other masters in the Sutra school and so forth. There was a lot of debate at that time in India between the masters of different schools. So the criticism of it. Now, there's the criticism that you have in your book, but as I was looking through this, I realized that that translation really wasn't good. It was pretty bad. It was just not right. So I'm going to show you a different version of those. That's stanza and a half. So actually the first part, the third is best because the action determines time. So this is what is 26 C and D in the book in the middle of page 406. I just did it in a bit shorter form, and actually it matches the Tibetan and the Sanskrit. I'm showing you the Tibetan, not the Sanskrit, because this is the part that in this Tibetan that relates to the previous topic, which of the 4 is best. And then this part, the Geksche in Tibetan, this is showing you, this is saying, what would block them? So I translated they'd block. It's actually not, doesn't mean they'd block. It actually means what would block them? What would prevent them? What would prevent the past and future from happening in the present? If they exist substantially and they have an action, what prevents the action that's already happened in the past from happening again? What prevents that? Or when you have a future action, why isn't if it substantially exists, why does that action not actually happen? So that's what it's saying. So the geksuche. So it's like, what would block them? In the Sanskrit, it's kim vignana. So what is stopping it? What stops the past and future from being manifest in the present? There's nothing that logically you could say that would make it work if they still exist substantially. And then the next question is, well, what is it? Now, it here in this stanza, this means, what is it means, what is action? Is the action the same as the phenomena that exist substantially in the past or future? Or is it different? It's a good question. So if you say that it is the same, well, here I can go to the commentary in back to the commentary in Wangchuk Dorji. Maybe I'll go through this first. So if it is different, then you've got two problems that come up. The first is that if the action, of course, is also a phenomena, and if the action is different than the phenomena, then so there's the action. That action being another phenomena also would have past and future and all sorts of stuff. So it would also have another action related to it, and then another related to that. So it would just be an infinite regress of actions. That's the first problem. The second problem is that then the phenomena itself would like be, or then if it's, the second problem is that, that the action or the phenomena would be different from time. And therefore, it wouldn't have any past or future. And it would, as a result, it would be non-compound. It would be and unable to perform any action. So how could it be related? So this is a big difficulty. And the other problem is if you say, oh, is the action, if you say, well, if that's the case, then the action is not different than the phenomena. You say that there's a same, then it's not logically time if there's still past and future. Because if it's not different, then it wouldn't change from being arisen to non-arisen or rising. The action couldn't work. So that wouldn't be logical for it to be time. And so in that way, and then the third problem is, well, if they exist, if the actions exist, if the phenomena exist substantially, then why would they be unborn or perished? Why is it that they would have arisen and not yet arisen, been unborn or future, or why would they be perished in the future? If they really exist and they're no different between if they really exist substantially, then how could they be perished? Gone, right? When something's perished, it's gone. So that's a revision of those stanzas. So now to go back to the commentary on these verses. So here to give Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, the two times would block the action from happening because they have action and exist substantially. So the future and the past, if they have action and they exist substantially, would stop the action. The past and future would stop the action from happening because they exist substantially. If it exists, then it can do its function, right? So the future, the function of the future is to not yet arise, and so the present could never happen if the future substantially existed. And what is it? What is so-called action? Is it different from time or not? If it is different from time, then it is non-compound. So in other words, if you're going to have an action, and if it's different from time, so here this is a slight difference between Vasubandhu in the auto commentary and Wangchuk Dorje. Vasubandhu says, if it is different from the phenomena. Here, Wangchuk Dorje says, if it is different from time, if the action is different from time, in essence it is the same because time is not different from phenomena. So if the action is different from time, then it is non-compound. So if the action is different from time, then it can't have any past or future. And so therefore, if you have no past or future, then it's non-compound. So therefore, action would be permanent, right? Because if it's non-compound, it's not going to change. It's going to be permanent. However, if that action is not different from time, then all the times would have action, right? The action, because you have the action of, say, you've got the action of killing your neighbor last night. You've got your knife and you're stabbing your neighbor with your knife. So if that action has time, If it doesn't have time, then you'd still be stabbing your neighbor. So that doesn't make sense. So it wouldn't be all the times would have action, so it wouldn't be logical for the action not to be performed in the past and future times as well. So you stabbed your neighbor last night, but because that action is the same as the phenomena of stabbing, then the stabbing, that action happening, would still be happening now because it would also exist substantially, just as the phenomena does. Or in the future, if you're going to stab your neighbor tomorrow night, then that would be happening now because it wouldn't be separate from the actual substantially existent future one. So the time just would not work out. So if the action exists, then it is not separate from time, but in the two times, the action has not arisen or it is destroyed, so it does not exist, you say. So this is a kind of the poor great exposition school is trying to defend this situation. So if the action exists, it's not separate from the time, but in the two times the action has not arisen or it is destroyed. So it also hasn't, so it doesn't exist. But that doesn't exist. That does not make sense, because if you propose that just as they are in the present, actions also exist in the other two times, why aren't they also arising and perishing in the past and future? Why not? Why is the future not, if it exists substantially and it's not separate from the action, why is it not arising? So it would follow that the action should not be arisen and should have perished in the present as well. So this is Vasubandhu's criticism. This is something that takes a little bit of thought. Those of you who really want to go into this, there's a lot more detail on this in the Auto commentary and also in the Chimjambayang commentary. So if you really want to look at this in more detail, I suggest that you take a look at the Chimjambayang or also there are the translations of the Auto commentary that are available in English and French. There's the translation by Louis de Valet-Poussin, who was a Belgian scholar from the late 19th, early 20th century. And then there are two translations of that translation into English. So one by, what was his name? Proudhon, Leo Proudhon, done back in the 1960s or 70s. And then a more recent one by Loder Sampo. And so you can look at those if you want more detail on that. I think it's enough for right now. The most important point here about this point is thinking about, well, what is the nature of things in the different times? How can they exist? So the great exposition position is that things exist substantially in all three times. But that's a difficult position to defend logically. At this point in the Auto commentary, Vasubandhu says that this is not logical. When the Buddhists when the Buddhist spoke of past things existing, what he meant is that things that have occurred, that have arisen and then perished, we say that they exist in the past because they had the existence at one point in the present. They've gone past. They do not exist they don't literally exist any longer, but we say they exist because they did exist at one time. Future things that will happen, we say that they exist even though they haven't yet happened, because it's kind of like saying that they exist without them actually having any substantial existence. The difficulty in the great exposition tradition is saying that they have substantial existence, which means saying that they exist as a real substance, a real thing. If you say that, they're going to happen, and therefore we can freely say that they exist in the future, that's a different matter. But if you say that there's something real in the future, that's a problem logically. So there was a lot of debate, and the great exposition school had a lot of difficulties, defending its positions. And so the next line, the 27D, which is near the top of page 407 in the book, says, their response is, so deep are the natures of dharmas. The great exposition school says that the past and future must exist. To those who cannot be convinced, they say, so deep are the natures of dharmas, the natures or inherent essences of dharmas or phenomena. These are not, without a doubt, these are not the sphere of sophists, of intellectuals, people like me, things that we can't understand because it's beyond intellect. You just can't understand it. That's what they're saying. So this is the position, or the way Vasubandhu concludes this section on the 3 times. So when we're talking about the 3 times, the important point of the questions on the 3 times, actually, this is this is like one of the little digressions that happens in the middle of this text. There are many such digressions. So the important point here is, how does this relate to the afflictions? We've been talking about how the afflictions bind you to objects of the past and future. So are they binding you to something real? Are the past afflictions still real? The great exposition position is that they are. So in this discussion of how the afflictions bind us to the 3 times, we started out with a description of which afflictions are bound to which type of object. Then we had to talk about the 3 times as the kind of digression. And so now we're coming back to that question of which afflictions bind you to the times. So here's the issue, and it says here, number 3, discarded yet possessed. And this is a very literal translation of the Tibetan, and it's not always entirely, entirely communicative in English. So what it means is afflictions that have been discarded, but you still have them. How is that? So this is something, again, when we think about, well, which afflictions view which things, there are points when you discard afflictions, but there are other afflictions that are discarded later that still kind of look back on them. And if look at those, and if those afflictions are still looking at them, are still observing or focusing on them, then they've got to have some kind of an existence in order to be observed. So this is what they say is they've been abandoned, which means that they won't operate again, but you still possess them, you still have them. So there are 2 points here. There are those about the discards of seeing and the discards of meditation. So the text reads, suffering is seen, they've been discarded, still other universals bind them. So the question is, when one has discarded a thing, has it been removed? That is, are you free of it? And has everything one has removed been abandoned, you ask? So basically saying, when you discard an affliction, because that's what when we're talking about discarding, we're talking about discarding afflictions, getting rid of afflictions. So have you got rid of it? You can kind of think of it like an analogy would be like, there are kind of 2 stages. There's you've got your trash, there's putting it in your trash basket, and then there's taking your trash out. So is this 2 steps or 1 step? And so for some afflictions, it is 2 steps. You've got to put it in the trash basket, and then you've got to put it out. So when you've put it in the trash basket, you've still cleaned up, you've cleaned up your kitchen after your meal, and you put the trash in the trash basket, and it's clean. But you still have that bag in the kitchen, and then when it's full in a couple days, you take it out. So suffering is seen, they've been discarded, still other universals bind them. So when you have removed something, you have abandoned it. But it is possible to abandon something without removing it. So once you've removed it, it's definitely abandoned. But there can be the intermediate stage. For example, you can clean your kitchen and take the garbage out at the same time. That's removing and abandoning. Or you can throw it away and take out your garbage tomorrow, right? So this is like abandoning it without removing it yet. You just haven't taken the garbage out. When suffering is seen, so when you see the truth of suffering on the path of seeing, that is, all of those kernels have been discarded upon seeing suffering. Let me get this so that everything's on 1 page. Can I do that? No, that's not doing it. Okay. So when suffering is seen, so here we are in the text, When suffering is seen, they, that is all those kernels. So when you see suffering, then you've got all the kernels that are eliminated by seeing suffering. You've got your greed, or a desire, anger, delusion, pride, doubt, and the 5 views. So when you see suffering, they have been abandoned. They are discarded upon seeing suffering. All those kernels have been discarded upon seeing suffering, it says. But still, the other remaining universals, that is the omnidirectional kernels that are discarded by seeing the origin, bind them. So you see suffering, but you haven't yet seen the truth of origin. At that point, there are still the universal kernels of the origin, the omnidirectional kernels of seeing the origin, that then still look back and see the truth, see the phenomena and the truth of seeing. So it's like when you are once you have abandoned the truth of seeing, you've put all those discards in your trash basket. They're gone, you're clean of them, but you can still open up the trash basket and look at it, right? So the universal, the omnidirectional kernels of doubt and ignorance in the truth of, regarding the truth of origin, can still metaphorically open up the trash and look at the discards of seeing suffering that are in the trash basket. So they're still there, but they're there, and you're still bound by them. They're still bound because they can still kind of look back at them. They can open up the trash and look at it as kind of a stupid little analogy of how to think about it, but so they're still bound by them. So that's what the discards of seeing. Now, when you have you also have the 9 types of discards of meditation. So this is one where we need a little bit of an explanation before we go into saying, well, how do the discards work? You have to understand a little bit more about how the path of meditation works. So the path of meditation, according to the Great Exposition, and it's similar in the present-day Theravada school, is that you have to eliminate all of your attachments. Once you've seen the truth of suffering, you have to eliminate all of the discards of meditation, that is, all of the remaining afflictions, gradually for each of the different realms of samsara. So this would be first for the desire realm, and then for the form realm, and then for the formless realm. And actually, the formal and the formless realm, there are 4 levels of each, so it's a total of 9 levels. So you've got 9 levels of discards of meditation that you have to eliminate. Now, within each of them, like when you have the discards of seeing, when you have the discards of meditation, they're kind of hard to get out. They're deeply ingrained, and so it's not like you can just sit down and meditate for one day and get them out. You have to go through, you have to follow the instructions and do the meditation practices, and it takes time. And so they are removed in stages. And traditionally we say that there are 9 different stages for each of the levels of each of the levels of samsara. So you've got the level of desire realm. Let's talk about desire realm now. Once you've gone through and you've seen all 4 truths, you have no more of the kind of imaginary afflictions that are based upon ideas of a self and so forth. Those are the discards of seeing, they're gone, but you've got that kind of deeper seated attachment. That deeper seated attachment comes in different levels. There's kind of the greater, the medium, and the lesser. And if you look at it even on more level, and traditionally it's divided up into saying, well, and even the greater, there are some that are greater than, there's some that are larger and some that are smaller. So it's the greater is divided into 3. The greater of the greater, the middle of the greater, and then the lesser greater. And then you have the middling, 3 middling ones, and there's the greater middling, the middling, and the lesser middling. And then last of all, you have the lesser, and those are done into 3 sets: the greater, lesser, middling, lesser, and then the lesser, lesser. So in total, you have 9 different discards, or sort of 3 sets of 3, right? Basically saying we've got 9 gradations, and they're kind of growing from coarser to subtle. And so the coarser we call the greater of greater, and the subtlest we call the least of the lesser. So those are the 9 levels. Now, these all kind of can look, they're all different levels of affliction, different types of affliction, and they can kind of look at everything in their own class. They can all see all of the other discards on their own class and own level. For example, your lesser attachment of desire can focus on the greater attachment of desire. So they can kind of look back and forth when you haven't discarded them. And so then when you discard them in order, you first start out by you sit in your meditation, the preparations for the dhyana meditation. We'll get to that in the next chapter. But you're in a deep meditation. It's not quite the dhyana meditation yet. For us, we'd think it's a really great shamatha meditation. And on that level, you have a lot of ability to analyze things, and you can then go through and analyze these 9 sets of afflictions in order. So you first start with a greater of greater, you eliminate those, then the middling greater, then the lesser greater, then the greater middling, lesser middling, then the greater lesser, middling lesser, lesser lesser. Now, when I'm speaking like this, it probably at first it sounds like gibberish. So what you might want to do is actually kind of make a drawing for yourself, a little chart of these so you can get an idea of how it works. You've got your 3. Maybe I should have done one on Keynote. I didn't think about this when I was preparing, but it's a way you can do it. You can make your own little chart of what are these 3. You've got the 3 greater ones. You've got the 3 main categories of greater, middling, and lesser, and then you've got 3 from each of these: the greater, middling, and lesser of greater, the greater, middling, lessing of middling, and the greater, middling, lessing of the lesser. And so in that way, you've got in total 9 categories, right? So that's the kind of background. So the point that we're talking about is when you have abandoned the afflictions, do you still have them? So with the discards of meditation, to go back to the text, the first has been abandoned, yet still tied by stains whose sphere it's in. So the first, like when you eliminate the greater of the greater meditation discards, the middling greater, the lesser greater, and also all those other ones down to the lesser of the lesser, they can still go back and look at the greater of the greater. For example, you are doing your kitchen cleanup overnight. You've got a big garbage can and you don't generate a lot of garbage. So you're doing your kitchen cleanup. Day 1, you've got a whole lot of trash on day 1 because you haven't cleaned for a few days. So you put a lot of trash in the trash basket or garbage in the rubbish bin. Then on day 2, you've got rid of it, you've cleaned up, it's still there in the rubbish bin. If you open it up, you can look at it. On day 2, you clean up again, and you still got a whole bunch left to throw away. So you put day 2's garbage and so forth until day 9. On day 9, the garbage bin is full and your kitchen is pretty darn clean. So you take the garbage bag out and you put it, and you wait for the garbage delivery to come, or you take it to the dump or whatever you do with your garbage. And then it's gone. So at the beginning, on the first day, you've abandoned them, but they're still there. And you're still tied to them by the afflictions that look at them from the other levels. So now to go through the commentary, and again, I'm going to resize my window and see if I can get it all together. That's the next one. Oh, it's the next one. So among the 9 types of discards of meditation, the first, the greater of the greater, may have been abandoned and removed. Now here, Wanchuk Dorje says removed. It doesn't say removed in the auto commentary. It's like you've abandoned it, you've put it in the trash can, yet one is still tied to it by the focus of the remaining stains whose sphere it is in. So so you've got that, and the meditation discards of each level can focus on any of the other meditation discards. So the subtler desires and aversions and so forth can still look at the greater ones, even though they've been discarded, been abandoned. Just like you can still open up your kitchen trash and look inside. So, and then once you go through, so as you go through that, you've got the 9 stages, and as you abandon each stage in succession, then your being is getting cleaner and cleaner. Then when you get rid of that last one, They're all, not only are they all abandoned, but they're also removed, right? So once you abandon the lesser of the lesser, then they're all gone. So this is basically saying that the afflictions are discarded in stages. And until you've abandoned all of a set of afflictions, you still are kind of tied down to the other ones. If you think about it in another way, when you are going through and abandoning the afflictions, all of the 9 sets of afflictions for the desire realm, you're still in the desire realm until you abandon the last set of afflictions. Until that, you still got a little bit of baggage. It's once you've completely done the work and completely cleaned yourself that you've got no more baggage. Okay, so that I think is enough for this morning. Maybe we didn't go through as much text, but we had a bit of background information and so forth. So at this point, if any of you who are watching over Zoom have any questions, we can take a question or two.
Hello, I'd like to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
What is substantially existing? I was just wondering, do you mean as in obstructive form? I remember last year you talked about obstructive and non-obstructive.
Yes.
So just wondering.
Yes. Well, this is kind of when we say substantially existent, this is kind of a limitation of, in some senses, limitation of English, or maybe I just didn't find the best word for it. But basically, when we say that something is substantially existent, you're saying that it's real. There's something real about it. And it includes the obstructive things like obstructive form, things that we would normally think of as having a physical substance. But it also includes things that have more of a mental substance, such as the mind and mental factors. And it includes phenomena such as cessations, the other non-composite phenomena that have some sort of a real existence. So substantially existent and real existence are kind of synonymous. So substantial existence would mean that. Now, the reason I chose that is kind of because of the Tibetan word zeyu in Tibetan, and in Sanskrit dravyasat. So those are kind of like the etymology. So dravya, it's like the stuff, but stuff is not necessarily physical. The stuff something is made of. Physical things are made out of physical stuff. Mental things are made out of mental stuff. And the non-compound and stainless phenomena are kind of made out of the non-compound stuff, whatever that is. Of course, when we say substance and stuff, it makes us think of physical, but it's not necessarily physical. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions today? Urmila has one that isn't a direct message. What does abandoning mean in terms of meditation here? Basically, what abandoning means in terms of meditation is that basically the way that a discard is eliminated, and we go through this in greater detail in chapter 6. The discards, or the afflictions, are based on misunderstandings. And so they're kind of gross misunderstandings of mental things that are discards of seeing, and the subtle misunderstandings of everything else that are discards of meditation. They're based on ignorance. So when you develop a certain level of wisdom, then at that point, the ignorance that goes with it is the same, just can't be there at the same time. The classic example of this is when you see something from far away and you aren't sure, is that a person or is it something else? You can't see, and you have doubt. You can have all sorts of thoughts. When you see it from far away and you think it's going to be this or that, and you can have all the afflictions can develop. But when you get close and you see it right up, you say, that's a person. It's a scarecrow. It's a something else. It's a tree, whatever it actually was. You see it for what it is. So when you develop the wisdom that sees a little bit more of the nature of the discards of seeing, or the nature of the deeper nature of phenomena that helps you overcome the attachment to the three realms, when you have that wisdom, it's like a light, and the darkness of the affliction just immediately goes away. So the point is that we have to develop this wisdom, and the wisdom comes in stages. That's why there are all the different stages of meditation. We've got the 4 stages of the 4 noble truths, and all the stages of eliminating the discards of seeing. We've got all the different stages of eliminating the discards of meditation. So we've got all sorts of stages that we have to go through to develop each additional little bit of wisdom. And as you develop the wisdom and the afflictions are, technically we'd say that they're exclusive of coexistence. They can't stay at the same time. They can't be in the same place at the same time. So once you have wisdom, then the affliction goes away. And because wisdom is seeing things as they are, it's real. Once you have it, you don't lose it, generally, with some exceptions we'll discuss later. There are always exceptions or almost always exceptions in the Abhidharma. So that's how it works. It's by developing wisdom that then means that affliction cannot function.
So what is the difference to other schools, or other to the not the Great Exposition school?
The basic process is exactly the same. And in the I haven't studied the Theravada well enough to know the other traditions. The basics are the same, the specifics are different. In the foundation vehicle schools, you're generally dealing with the afflictions. In the Mahayana, you are dealing with the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations. You've got a whole different level of obscurations you're dealing with, and so the meditations are different as a result. And so those are the 2 basic things. And when you're dealing with the Vajrayana, you're just dealing with different methods to eliminate the same cognitive and afflictive things. So it's just different methods in different ways, and slightly different ways of dividing it up. But the essential thing, when you see the nature, then the misunderstandings and afflictions just go away.
Thanks.
Okay. Then I think that this may well be enough for this morning. And so now let us dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma as representative of all the merit that we or any other sentient being has ever accumulated in the past or will accumulate in the future. And thinking in this way, please let's recite the dedication of merit. Osanam de tam che se pani tomne nye pedranam pam chete Kegana chi balong chubai Sipe tsolero kunyun rosho Chanchu semcho rimboche ma ke panam ke juruchi Kepa nyamba me paryang gonde gondo pelwar sho. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.